Hello, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us at our Summer 2023 Virtual Lightning Talk event. This program was developed by the Digital Scholarship Section's Professional Development Committee in collaboration with both the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and the Outreach Committee. Thank you to our presenters, ACRL staff, and DSS committee members for their coordination effort. In the spirit of encouraging equity, diversity, and inclusion in the DSS community and beyond, I will read a brief statement. Please take a moment and review the guidelines on this slide. We, the DSS community, agree to frame interactions in DSS activities with these guidelines in mind. We recognize that whenever we engage as a community, we will all make mistakes and that we may unintentionally harm individuals or groups, but we agree to take responsibility for the results of our words and actions. We expect that all DSS meetings begin with this brief review of these agreements so that they may become standard activities for our section. Now I will introduce our panelists. Presenters today include Sarah Newhouse is a digital preservation archivist at the Science History Institute and a member of the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collections Libraries' newly formed Technology Sustainability Working Group. Celia Cost Ellenbogen is an archivist at Swarthmore College and co-chair of Pascal's Technology Sustainability Working Group. Emily Coquier is a science librarian at Washington State University. Her interests include biology, life sciences, chemistry, human health, and pharmacotherapy, data librarianship, and research ethics. Before coming to WSU, she worked as a senior writer for BioCentury and as a non-proprietary naming consultant to the pharmaceutical industry. And we also have Nick Zudlowski, who is a librarian with experience in scholarly communications, repository management, preservation, and web development. His recent projects include the digital exhibits Robert Morris, civil rights lawyer and anti-slavery activist, and Betita Martinez, a memorial exhibit. Let me stop sharing and invite Sarah and Celia to begin.
Hello, thank you. It's lovely to see everyone today. My name is Celia, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm Associate Curator of the Friends Historical Library of Swarthmore College.
And I'm Sarah Newhouse. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Digital Preservation Archivist at the Science History Institute.
Today, we're talking to you in our capacity as co-chairs of the Technology Sustainability Working Group of the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collections Libraries. That's PACSCL for short. PACSCL member institutions are located within Lenapehoking, the traditional ancestral land of the Lenape people. I'm going to start with a bit of context for you. PACSCL is a consortium of over 30 special collections libraries in the Delaware Valley area, from central New Jersey to central Pennsylvania down to the state of Delaware. Our members are college and university collections, independent research libraries, and museum archives. PACSCL was founded in 1985, and around 2019, we went through a major restructuring. That resulted in hiring our first full-time managing director, Beth Lander. Beth has implemented and worked with our extremely active board to begin to standardize and document our practices, resulting in some new administrative structures and a lot of newly established policies. This transformation included the formation of our working group. Our committee was founded in 2021, but really concern about the sustainability of digital assets started gaining traction within the PAC School board back in the late 2010s. PAC School has been very successful with securing collaborative grants over the past couple of decades. And at the time Beth started as managing director, we had 4 active grant-funded projects and more proposals in the pipeline. So the working group was started with a 3-year charge, primarily to understand and clarify PAC School's own responsibilities as a library consortium, and as a bonus, to offer value to our members by making guidance available to them for their own projects. Even defining what falls into our scope of responsibility can be tricky. Some assets are owned and managed by PAC School. Some are owned by PAC School, but managed by one of our member institutions. And then, of course, each member institution has its own assets. Sarah will talk about some of the tools we developed to keep track of assets, as well as relationships and responsibilities for maintaining them or not.
So for this presentation, I'm dividing the tools that the working group created up into 2 groups. The first group is tools that are intended to be used or mandated to be used by institutions that are partnering with the PAC School Consortium on digital projects. And the second group is tools that are intended to be used by the wider GLAM community. So not at all limited to our geographical area or to PAC School member institutions. The first of these tools created for PAC School projects is our inventory of our current digital assets. And this takes the form of a Google spreadsheet, like most of the other tools we've produced. We created this inventory with the goals of locating all the projects. When this working group was formed in 2021, we knew that PAC School had been involved in the creation of many consortial and cross-institutional projects over the years, but we didn't really have a good overview of all of them. We also wanted to identify at-risk assets and projects, document the stewards and managers of those projects and other administrative information about them. And of course, we wanted to understand the costs and the budget for each project. And this inventory was a success. We actually ended up splitting the inventory into active and retired projects. And we anticipate managing it going forward to add new projects and shift retired projects out of that active list. During the process of creating the inventory, we discovered that we have 21 active projects and 5 that we consider retired in one way or another. And it's really helpful to now have information about all of them in one place. The digital project tracking form is maybe the most important tool that we created for PAC School projects. This is a spreadsheet that asks project staff at the institution partnering with the consortium to submit information about what their project is 3 times. So they submit information when the project is first proposed to a funder. And then if the funding is achieved and the project begins, they update that information. And then the information gets updated again when the project ends. There's a pretty robust and plain language set of instructions baked in to explain jargon or define terms that can have different meanings depending on their context. We really wanted project staff who are not themselves intimately familiar with the technology behind the project to be able to fill this out, to lower the barrier to collecting the data in the first place. The tracking form is divided into 4 sections, and I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour, and hopefully Celia can share a link in the chat to a copy of this form if you want to see the whole thing and follow along. So this is part of the project information section of this tracking form, which includes the administrative information you would expect, like who is the project lead? When do you expect active work on the project to end? And of course, where is the funding coming from? And as you can see here, and in subsequent screenshots we're sharing, we've marked some fields as required at different stages. But the general rule is that if something isn't required, you only fill it out if the data has changed since the last time you filled it out. So there are certain things we need to know at each stage, but otherwise don't touch that field unless there's something new to report. The second section of the form is all about your digital assets, whatever they might be. And these are pretty standard considerations, like how many assets do you estimate being involved in the project? What type of files are they? Where are you storing them? What's the copyright and usage situation, etc. There's a metadata section, which is distinct from the assets section, where we ask project staff to think about how they're licensing their metadata, what schemas they're using, where they're storing it, and how many distinct metadata records they might have. And note here that very few of these are required at the proposal stage, as we don't expect people at the very beginning of a project to have this all figured out yet. But of course, it would be great if they did. And the last part of this form includes a few questions about technology, architecture, and systems. And none of these are required at the proposal stage, but by the project start, we do expect you to know what systems you're using and where everything is being hosted. And by the time your project is wrapping up, we expect you to know where the project documentation is being stored. We also created a memorandum of understanding that's distinct from the project tracking form, but does assume that you, an institution partnering with Paxful for a project, has filled out the tracking form once at the proposal stage. The MOU is just a document outlining the responsibilities of both Paxful and the institution, and it's very flexible. We actually have two separate MOU templates, one for asset hosts and one for project contributors. So if, for example, one institution is providing texts that are being digitized for a project and hosting the resulting TIFF files, another is providing transcription and markup, and a third is providing contextual scholarly essays, each of those institutions will fill out a different MOU outlining their relationship with Paxful for the duration of the project. Only the institution hosting the TIFF files would fill out the host MOU, and the others would fill out the MOU for contributors. And this is, of course, non-binding. It's really just to make sure everyone's expectations are clear. And the last tool that we made for Paxful projects, and maybe the one that I'm the most proud of, is a checklist for sunsetting your digital project. Institutions should fill this out together with a Paxful representative as the active development phase of a project draws to a close. Like the MOU, this checklist assumes that you filled out the project tracking form at least once, and you can use your answers there to figure out things in the checklist like, so the project is ending, who's responsible for maintenance when things break from here on out? Who has admin access, especially if project staff are on soft money? Who do you need to notify if a project is ending or being taken off the web? And are you transferring access or ownership or any documentation to Paxful itself? And while the larger community, of course, can use and adapt any of these tools intended just for Paxful projects, we did make a few things with a broader audience in mind, and these things are not mandated parts of developing a project with Paxful. The Digital Project Sustainability Framework is a text document that is just a list of questions and prompts to get people planning digital projects, thinking about issues that will affect the project's long-term sustainability. So these are things like, what are you considering an asset? How do you define that? Where's your funding coming from? What format is your metadata in? How can the public retrieve your metadata? And how can you retrieve your metadata? So it covers pretty much everything in the tracking form, but it doesn't ask for quantifiable answers that will be reported to Paxful. And instead, it just gives you areas of concern in what we think is pretty accessible language. And we also have a public Google Drive folder of preservation policies from Paxful member institutions intended to be used as models or guidance for writing your own. Currently, it has documents from only one institution in it. Thank you to Villanova University, but we do hope that it fills up a bit in the future.
So I'm going to wrap things up now by talking a bit about outcomes and what's next for our group. So the first test of our new digital sustainability infrastructure was the Chronicling Resistance project, which wrapped up earlier this year. It had several phases with websites and assets associated with each. So as part of our new process, we met with the project team to map out all of the assets, learn about expectations for lifespans, and document technical details. As a result of this process, we learned about an early phase component in Omeka collection that could be sunset. And that's when we developed the sunsetting process and executed it. There was one hitch. There was a misunderstanding about what was happening with the pilot project site. There was a former project staff member who had a link on her resume to a page that broke when we removed the Omeka content. She was frustrated about this until we explained that as a part of our sunsetting process, we had been careful to crawl all of the content onto the Paxcal web archive on Archive It. So we were able to supply her with a working link to an archived version of the page, and she was satisfied with that. Digital sustainability is somewhat of a hot topic in the Philadelphia GLAM community right now because of controversy surrounding the Mutter Museum. I won't get into it in detail, but just to say it's a medical history museum that has come under new leadership and is reevaluating the ethics of what objects are on display in person and online. They have taken down a lot of digital content as part of these discussions, and a lot of people, especially former employees, are very publicly mad about it. So the Technology Sustainability Working Group is about 2 years into our 3-year charter, and we've already accomplished all of our original goals. But we have become convinced that there is an ongoing need to focus on this topic. Right now, we're working on a petition to be converted into a more permanent subcommittee or maybe an ad hoc committee. We won't be developing policy and procedures at the same breakneck pace we have been, but we will need to keep attention on projects through all the stages of their life cycle. And Sarah and I are going to close it up here, and we're happy to answer any questions during the Q&A. You can also feel free to contact us by email. But one last thing, we wanted to point out that the resources from our committee are available on the Paxcal website, paxcal.org. In case you've been missing some of the links in the chat, you can find those there on the best practices page. So thank you so much for our time. Here again is our contact information, and we look forward to any questions from you during the Q&A.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Emily.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks very much, everybody. My name is Emily Cuquier. I'm a science librarian at Washington State University, and today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about some of my explorations of a new online database for searching across scholarly papers. Okay. So the database I'm going to be talking about is called the General Index. We'll go through some things like what you can potentially do with it, why that's been difficult, 2 ways I've found to get around some of those issues, and then show you exactly what you can get out of it when you do that, and then an invitation to collaborate. I am hoping to encourage some of you to experiment with this particular database, and for reasons we'll get into. So first off, what is the General Index? So this is produced by some of the same folks behind the Internet Archive. This is a database of words and phrases that have been extracted from over 100 million research papers. That's organized and separated out into 3 tables of keywords, engrams, and metadata. Keywords here means words and phrases that are important as determined by a particular algorithm, so not the same traditional library definition of keywords. Engrams are words and fragments of up to 5 words. This includes everything that was in the keyword set, but is much more all-encompassing of things extracted from the full text. And then last but not least, there is article metadata, like the title, the author, when and where things are published. And here's how equity and diversity come into play. This database is really great for removing some of the gatekeeping that naturally occurs with the scholarly record. So anybody can use this website, whether or not they're affiliated with a library. And even if you are not restricted by whether or not you have full text access to be able to search through things or the vendor tools that are supplied for being able to do that. And my thinking here is that the more people who can use this resource, the more perspectives they can bring into deciding the kinds of questions and things that they actually want to study in it. So what might you do with a database like this? One clear thing is to do a one-stop literature search. So you can put together a pretty good first pass bibliography on a topic without having to look across 5 or 6 different databases or articles, whether or not you actually have full text access to them. Another neat thing is thinking about watching concepts over time using publication dates as data. So what that lets you do is follow trends much like Google Ngrams will let you do, except you can do it across the scholarly record. And then if you're feeling a little ambitious, I'm working towards this, you can try to do some corpus linguistics and text mining. Now, obviously, this is going to be limited because we only have fragments that are up to 5 words long. But you can think about the entire thing as a big bag of words model, or you can also get creative about doing proximity searching for terms that just happen to occur very close to one another. Now, I did say there were issues. Issue number 1 is that there's really no user interface at all for this. There's no search box. If you go to the website, you download the raw data files, you figure out what program you want to use to identify and read the records you want. And even if that, even if you think that's no biggie, the data files are also really huge. The smallest one is about 4 gigabytes. The biggest ones get to be over 2 terabytes. Not everybody has that kind of hard drive lying around. But actually, RAM is almost more of an unexpected limiting factor here in that most computers and a lot of programs like Excel just do not have the RAM ability to even open a file of 4 gigabytes. So those are some things you need to figure out. Thankfully, I did come across 2 ways to potentially approach this database in spite of these. So the first way I did it was to visit my university's high performance computing cluster. They were able to give me enough storage and RAM plus a stable enough network to work with to overcome a lot of those issues. However, I appreciate not everybody has that or wants to work with an HPC cluster. So I've also figured out a way to do some of these things using only my desktop computer, which if you've seen my desktop computer, it's very sad. But I am working on a paper that actually describes the process of some of the things that I've been able to do. And kind of the key takeaway lessons out of that are you kind of have to scale back, look only at the keywords, get yourself at least a reasonably modest sized hard drive to play with, and use some coding workarounds that let you read and work with only a specific subset of records that have the concepts in them you want, as opposed to trying to open the entire file all at once. Now, next, I'm going to give you a sampling of what each of these methods is able to help you produce. So this is the main research project that I've been working on for a while now, and this is to look at the different titles that women use for themselves over time. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, by doing this project, I am not intending at all to enforce the concept of gender as a binary, or to say what individual is allowed to use a title, or to say what titles people should use. There's none of that judgment here. This is purely just examining the proportions of use of those titles in the past. And it's actually surprisingly hard to find information about that. But I was hoping to be able to get sort of a rough picture of what that looks like from this database. So what I've been able to do is actually find out, what percentage of articles in the general index contained each of these titles for a given year, and then watch how that percentage changes over time. Then if I compare that to Google Books and Ngram Viewer data, I can actually put that academic setting into a broader cultural context of how women's titles have been represented in both fiction and nonfiction. So here is what those trends look like, starting from about an arbitrary date of 1900. So what you'll see, the general thing that's happening here is that honorific usage is kind of declining in both across all the genders, particularly so in academic papers. You really see tendency to use a title to really fall out of style. As you might expect, we see a lot more use of the title doctor in the scholarly index, general index scholarly papers compared to Google Books, and it has more staying power there as well. Now, with that general background in mind, let's home in on the female honorifics. So I've blown up those 3 lines, starting at about 1950. We see the term Ms. established itself quite quickly in the early 1970s, and that corresponds very nicely to right about when Ms. magazine comes out in the end of 1970. In both of these research corpora, we see it rising up as the 2 alternatives for women decline. I think we see more of the draw coming from those who would use Miss. We also see it kind of hit a plateau or a saturation point. Now, in the book corpus, we actually see it declining again, starting about the mid-90s. And we don't really see the same thing happening in the general index. There, it actually kind of stays to be the predominant term until almost really the last 2 years of our data set. Whether that bit at the very end is a real thing or not, I'm not entirely sure. Again, this is a very, very broad brush look at this concept, but we can definitely see some things that look interesting and that do seem to reflect cultural dynamics of the time. Like in particular, like we see Ms. across this general Google Books rise quite a bit and then decline right around the same time we're seeing backlash to second wave feminism, and when the term Ms. is maybe gaining more negative connotations and stereotypes. We see that decline happen a lot less in academia, and it could very well be due to the types of people who happen to be participating in academia, what their demographics are, and potentially also whether or not the stereotypes that are associated with that term are really actually harmful or maybe neutral or even positive in that setting. I could talk a lot about this, but this is a lightning talk. So we're going to move on to another example for what you can do without a high-performance computer. So I just did a little demo search looking for the phrase digital humanities to see how popular it's been lately. And so what we see is, beginning around 2000 or so is when it starts taking off in papers. And then we see something that almost looks like exponential growth until about 2016 or so, where it levels off. And I would not conclude we've hit peak DH by any means. This is just one blunt instrument for thinking about a concept. But you could imagine that this would be a nice figure to accompany a paper that's talking about something like the history of this concept. And this is a nice way to illustrate that. Here is also what the data look like if you were trying to pull together a bibliography from metadata. These are just the first 8 results from that digital humanities search. And these are some of the fields that I picked out as I thought, to be most of interest to this audience, but there are certainly more. You will notice, yes, there are a lot of missing values. You will notice that formats are not really standardized here. The good news is you do usually get title and author. And even if you don't get that, you probably will get a DOI or something that would potentially, with some legwork, allow you to actually connect what your hit was to the article that it actually came from. And the last sort of fun thing I wanted to present is you could think about counting the journals in which a particular keyword winds up appearing. Again, there's a lot of missing values here. I absolutely admit that. So there's nothing robust about this analysis. But if you just want to get a sense where people are publishing on a certain topic, this is maybe a nice first pass way to do that. And you can actually see some things that make sense and some things that are a little interesting here. So that is the end of everything that I had prepared for today. I'm hoping that you agree with me that the General Index is potentially a useful resource for taking looks at the scholarly literature and things that happen over time. I fully admit it's not the easiest thing to use, but even with just a desktop computer, you can do things like keyword analysis and pull together bibliographies, and you can think about doing more nuanced work if you do happen to have access to a high-performance computer. I want to give a plug for campus high-performance computing centers. They are a core resource, much like libraries, and so usually they're very happy to talk to people, to partner on research, and they may be able to help you through some stuff that you might otherwise find intimidating. Last but not least, this is a resource that has way more possible uses than I could ever think of or have time to explore. And again, I want to encourage as many people as I can to think about asking a lot of different questions out of this. So if any of you are intrigued by this, again, I'm hoping to publish a paper on the process of using a desktop computer to query it. Happy to share that if and when it comes out, and even not, I'm just happy to have conversations to talk about what you might be interested in looking for or collaborating on. Please feel free to shoot me an email. And thank you very much for your time and attention today.
Thank you so much, Emily. Next up, our last lightning talk presenter, Nick.
Great. Thank you, Joyce, and thank you, Emily. That was super interesting. Let me just get my Windows settled, and I'm going to put something in the chat for everybody. Where's the chat? There it is. So there we go. Here's a link to both the slides that have some links and also the project I'm going to be talking about. Oop. All right, great. So I'm going to be, my name is Nick Sadlowski. I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Martin Luther King Jr. Library at San Jose State University. And the title of my presentation today is Remembering a Social Justice Icon, Creating a Digital Memorial for Betita Martinez. I just want to give you a quick outline so you know what's coming in the talk. I'm going to be focusing on sort of some of the organizational and conceptual issues that came up during the project. So I may go quickly through some of the more content or technical things, but I'm happy to talk about those in the question and answer. I'm going to talk about finding a home for the exhibit and kind of how the project was conceptualized. And then I'm going to talk briefly about the workflow and process and software that we used and the development of the memorials feature on the site. Betita Martinez, a leader in the Chicana movement and a profoundly influential scholar, author, and activist, passed away in 2021. Soon after, Catherine Blackmer-Reyes, director of the SJSU Library's Africana, Asian American, Chicano, and Native American Studies Center, proposed a memorial project for Martinez to the library's institutional repository team. And at the core of Catherine's proposal was the idea of collecting memorials and tributes to Martinez. And I want to tell you sort of more of the process of this because I think it highlights some issues and kind of gets at the core of what we were interested in the project. So when Catherine proposed this project to the institutional repository team members raised a couple of concerns that may be familiar for people who work with IRs or work with digital collections and are kind of used to fielding proposals. There were concerns raised about copyright because all the material that was proposed is under copyright and includes content published by large newspapers. There were concerns about scope, concerns that possibly there wasn't a clear enough connection to the institution and that the project didn't fit with the IR's collection policy. And I'll say I particularly had concerns about tone in the sense of our ability to build a memorial that strikes the right emotional tone, that it feels human, that conveys, you know, an appropriate setting for sharing these kinds of memorials that's sensitive to the situation. And our ability to do that within the limitations of the IR and kind of just the design and structure of what the IR is. And I'm highlighting these concerns because I think these are things that, I find myself saying to people a lot when we get project proposals, and these are concerns that I feel like maybe groups, especially groups in the community that propose projects to us, may be tired of hearing from us about potential projects that they would like to collaborate with us on. So I'm going to talk about how we tried to get around and resolve some of these obstacles. So my response on this project was to pitch this exhibit as a pilot for an exhibit platform. And I'm not going to go through all of this slide, but I wanted to share it for sort of what I said internally to try and get support for the idea that though we have an IR and a digital collection management system, and I work with both of those systems, why we might need different or more flexible tools, specifically for projects like this that are really important to the library's mission, but don't fit some of our existing services or platforms. So how does doing this as a digital exhibit address those concerns? So, and I think you'll see some of this more as I demo the project, but in terms of addressing the copyright, constructing this as an exhibit, we were able to focus on displaying excerpts of the memorials rather than archiving the entire work. So remaining, very far within fair use and, really doing something that's more about presenting and bringing together and less about archiving copyrighted work that's also available in other sources. In terms of talking to people about the scope, I think it was helpful once we started, once Catherine and I kind of started articulating the project as something that, as a leading institution in the field of Chicano studies, SJSU was the right place for, so that even if this doesn't fit specifically what we're doing in the IR, it clearly fits the library's mission and the institution's mission, especially within that discipline. And I think that was helpful in reframing this in some of the conversations that where there was maybe initial skepticism about the project. And I think hopefully, the creating an exhibit allows us to do something that has the right tone, within the limits of our resources and our design skills, to create something that has the appropriate tone and sensitivity for a memorial. So in going ahead with this project, we piloted internal use of the digital project, digital exhibit platform WAX. And I did want to highlight for this group WAX because I think this is a platform that's gotten a fair amount of attention in sort of digital humanities circles, but I'm not sure how much people have seen this in the digital scholarship world. So compared to the other available platforms, WAX is unique in adopting minimal computing principles. And I've included some links at the end of the presentation if you're interested in reading more about what that means and what kind of some of the theory behind that is. But in practice, what that means is WAX starts with the static site generator Jekyll, and then it adds specific features for digital exhibits and digital humanities projects. So if you're familiar with both Omeka and Jekyll, or Omeka and static site generators, you might think of WAX as like largely following the feature set of Omeka, but using the technical architecture of something like Jekyll, where the pages are served as static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so we're able to host these sites. We actually are hosting them currently free on GitHub Pages, but they're also easily movable to other locations. And they're static. There's no server hosted database or anything like that behind them. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds with how WAX works, but I want to highlight just one thing about WAX's workflow, which is this orange box I've circled over here, which is that it starts with collection metadata records in CSV, JSON, or YML. And what that means is that you can either export records from other digital collection management systems, or you can have your content experts like Catherine working in spreadsheets to create the metadata, so working in a familiar setting, and you can kind of separate the tasks of web development and metadata development in a way that's, I think, very, very helpful for small team projects, especially. So I want to highlight, just to kind of illustrate what I found so exciting about this project, I want to highlight the memorials page that we developed. I think this is really sort of the core of the project. So this is a page, each of these boxes contains an excerpt from a memorial or an obituary, and they come up in a random order. There's some randomness in the timing to sort of soften this and try to make the presentation more human, maybe in a small way to evoke the experience of being at a memorial where people are standing up and giving testimonials about someone they knew or someone whose work impacted them. When you hover over these, you see where the source is. When you click through, you get obviously a larger version of the excerpt and some basic information about where it came from and a link to where it came from. And so you can see we're only sharing excerpts. We're not archiving whole works. And I hope that this kind of conveys the right emotional tone. So I was excited that we were able to do this. Wax kind of creates enough flexibility where this is a simple script that's doing this work. It's not anything particularly complicated. But because Wax is so flexible and kind of open, it's relatively easy to do this with the collection items. I just want to give some takeaways at the end. For those interested in the platform side, I found Wax flexible and fun to work with. And if you have other questions about it, I'm happy to answer them in the discussion. More on the process or big picture side, and I'm kind of trying to say this in a soft way, but try to convey what we're getting at here is, sometimes a collecting mindset or a policy-oriented mindset, it can get libraries into a place where we're setting up obstacles to potentially important projects and maybe missing the forest for the trees, or missing that these are important projects that we need to find a way to do, even if they don't fit into our current structures. And maybe if they don't fit into our current structures, we need to question those structures a little bit rather than questioning the projects. So in this case, thinking of the project and exhibit rather than the collection allowed us to work around the obstacles creatively, which was, which was great. It was good to be able to get this done. So here's a link to the completed exhibit. And, in terms of success or, takeaways from the pilot, we were able to do a second Wax exhibit this spring. So we're continuing to work with it. I just want to share some links at the end because there's a lot to this topic that I kind of just touched on. So here's a link to Wax. Here's some of the other tools we use. I'm sure people are familiar with the Night Lab tools, but some of the other features on the site use those. Here's an introduction to minimal computing and some more information on sort of the background and thought process and theory behind minimal computing. Here's our GitHub where you can find all the code. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And I'm excited to hear everybody's questions.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen here. So now we have an opportunity for questions and answers from our panelists here. I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat. If you do have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. There's a question for you, Nick. Does Wax require command line access?
I think the answer is yes. Yeah, it requires working in the command line on your local machine. It doesn't require command line access to any remote machines, if that makes sense.
Any additional questions? Well, I am not seeing any. So I'd like to thank our presenters today. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And I ask that you please fill out the form that's linked in the chat here when you get a chance. Also, ACRL will be sending out the recording and slides as well very shortly. So thank you so much for attending our Lightning Talk event today.